Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios. And today I have something a little bit different for our video. I would like to talk a bit about the code clutter that is generated by our programming languages. And this is something that I find that I will be very opinionated in this video, but I think we can do better. I think that it's time for programming languages to move beyond the limitations that were previously part of our programming languages. We can now have, I believe, we can now have smarter compiler. We can now have things that help us express ourselves better in the code. And in order to talk about this, I will talk about a project. It's an open source tool that I started and that basically process DMARC reports. I started this tool, but actually Thierry Depot is the one who did most of the work, and I'm very thankful with him for that. It's an open source project, so you can use it, you can change it, and so on, and I hope it's very useful. And I'd like to say that what I'm going to say today is in no way a criticism for Thierry. It's not about any particular person writing the code. Actually, I will criticize some of my own code as well. But it's more about the things that programming languages have pushed on us and that we thought were correct, or were normal, were natural, and I don't think they are. And I believe it's time for us to move a bit forward. This project is written in Python, which already doesn't have all the problems that other programming languages have. So what do I mean by that? Let's think about this for a moment. So let's say let me just show you a few examples of what I mean. Something dot, I don't know, Java, let's say. So in programming languages, we used to have, let's say you want to define and initialize something. You used to have to do something like this. String s equals new string of something. And this was incredibly annoying for me, right? This is clutter. So I guess before we move on, it might be useful to talk about what clutter means. Clutter is anything that is not absolutely necessary and that actually cuts down from our ability to understand code. And I think when we had this kind of thing, yeah, and let's not forget semicolon, there's so much clutter here. First of all, we have a duplication. Why do I need to have string and string? Why doesn't the compiler know that if I'm initializing a string, that thing is a string? I mean, really? Why is this so difficult? And then we have semicolons. Why do we need semicolons? Perhaps we need some kind of punctuation, okay. And we'll see that in Python it's a bit better, but even in Python we can improve, I believe, things. So we have this type of construct. Fortunately now we have something different, so we don't need to write this. In many programming languages we can write something like auto, in C++ or var in other programming languages. Okay, but at least now we are defining a variable. At least that's better. And maybe if we have a var, it might be nice to also have a const. Why don't we have a const? You know, const, I don't know, good grade equals 10 or equals A, in case we are using the American system. But now this is not possible. Instead, in Java, you have something like static final. I don't even remember how to do that, but it's really awkward. All right, so this is so many words for so little meaning. We have var. I would argue it's even better to have this and this. And why do we have this? How about that? Couldn't a compiler figure out what this is? I'm pretty sure it could, right? So this is what I mean by clutter. I would like to have fewer things in my code and smarter compilers that can figure out from context what I actually want to say, right? Let's also say that we want to define a function. Okay. So how do we do that? Let's say we do something like string, concatenate, string s1, string s2. Okay, I don't like these names, so let me write first, second, and then we have this, and we have return. No, let's assume we are actually doing something, and then first plus second, or somehow we concatenate. I don't care too much about the implementation. Once again, this declaration, this is interesting, but it's interesting for understanding the code. So I can definitely understand why we need something like this. Right? On the other hand, I can also very much live with this. And I don't like, okay, maybe, again, maybe we need some punctuation, but I think that the way Python is doing it is a bit better, even though in Python we need to write def. So I guess we need somehow to say that this is a method. So maybe method, right? Operation or something like that. Something that would be much more contextual to what we are actually trying to do. And once again, why do we need semicolons? I understand that they are helpful, right? But I think they are a limitation for the compiler. These are things that we are only writing down for a compiler. I don't think they are, at least today, right? It used to be, I understand the history of it. We needed some way to separate things. And I understand that there may be situations when things are, there are multiple interpretations of the same thing, okay? But perhaps there is a better way to fix this. So let's look a bit in Python, and I will take an example. This is a little bit of code that I wrote. And here I have a few. I like Python in general because it has fewer things here to, less clutter. It's better. It's easier to read. It has some constructs that you need to understand, but it's easier to read, and I could definitely make this code easier to read if with a bit more work. But one thing that I see in Python that is repeated, so we have def, and I understand, once again, I understand that def was what we were doing. We were defining something, okay? But today, I'm pretty sure that we could come up with something that is nicer. A keyword that is nicer, that tells me that this is a method or operation or a function, or perhaps we can even make a difference, a semantic difference between something that returns a value and something that actually makes an operation or makes changes and so on. But let's say def is not such a big problem. One thing that I don't like in Python is the underscore, and actually that's another thing that I find. Let me just quickly get out of this and do sun.py. So we have this kind of code, and let's ignore for now the implementation, because this is sorted of input dir files. Let's say something like that, just to make it easier. Let's assume that the code is actually very nice. Even with this, I have a few problems. We have self everywhere. And we have self at the same time with punctuation. So if you noticed, we have class, file, lister, and then this is, we use tabs to separate this, but then I have to write self everywhere. Once again, I understand why. It was an easy way of introducing classes and objects in Python. I like how objects are in Python. It's a nice model. But couldn't we get rid of self and just assume that everything that is inside the class has a self? Unless we have, of course, perhaps you'll need some static methods, although I'd like not to write static methods as much. It might be a good idea to have static methods completely separate. So I would prefer something like this. And if you add some empty lines, then it starts looking a bit better. But now my next problem is with this. Why do we need to have these ugly underscores? And of course I don't like input dir. What I would really like to write is input directory. And of course this is a bit weird, because in case we have some specifiers here, like we could have, I think, str. If I remember correctly, in Python I don't use types that much. Then of course this would be harder to read. So I would prefer something like that. Well, I can actually read easier the name. But the convention in Python is to use those underscore things. And I know that convention is also in other programming languages. One thing that I really liked in a programming language called Groovy is that you can have variable names, and I think method names are more common. I think with variables it's a bit difficult. But with methods names, we can actually have list input, list files in input directory. We can actually name them as a full string, which is not something that I used to do all the time because the names are a bit harder to find, and absolutely it's not as easy as with having simple names, but particularly for things like test names, this was incredibly useful. So I find this a bit easier to read. I really wish we could find a way to make this something like that, to make it actually text that we can read. I really wish that was the case. Perhaps something like, as simple as using punctuation again. List variables. If you have multiple variables, list them on line by line, and on every line, start with something. But then there's also a problem here when you use the variable, it becomes a bit difficult because this thing can be misinterpreted. You don't know, the parser won't know where the name is, and I assume it's a bit harder to figure out these kinds of names, particularly when you could also have inside text that overlaps with other things. Like if you have a directory variable or directory type someplace, it can become a bit difficult. But I don't know, maybe we can find a way where this kind of thing becomes more natural. It would be and easier to read. That's what I would really wish. Another thing that I don't like in Python is, this convention of starting with underscore the methods that are, let's say, private, that you expect to change. This is something that's okay. But let's talk about something else that I dislike, and that is the way we need to write main. This thing. Once again, this is clutter. If name equals main, then call main. Again, it's coming from historical reasons and so on. That's fine. You write it once, maybe not that bad. I understand. But still, it bothers me. I told you this will be very opinionated. Yeah, so this is once again self, something that I like to avoid, and the other things depend a lot on the writing style. I'm following the rules from clean code, so I tend to not have a lot of clutter in my code. So that's it for today. It's just a bit of a rant about the state of clutter in programming languages, and let me know what you think. Could we perhaps advance compilers and have something better? Could we have compilers guess more and more accurately what we are trying to write in a language that's closer to the natural human language? And I don't mean just write sentences and then things will happen, but I mean, names and using actual words, perhaps even using things like headers, using things like paragraphs, things that we would use normally in writing as people. Maybe it's the time for compilers to pick up on that. Now, I don't expect this to happen very soon, and I still like Python, so don't at me. I will still write code in Python. These things don't bother me that much as to stop me from actually solving problems. But I think it's time to think about how to make these things better. Because I think it's more and more the case that we need to turn technology to help people and not the other way around. We shouldn't be at the mercy of machines. We shouldn't be at the mercy of how compilers interpret what we write and just write things so that compilers can figure it out easier. No, let's make compilers understand what we would like to write in a more natural way. So this is what I'm pointing at. I hope you will leave me a comment and tell me your thoughts about this. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.